With the second pick in the 2021 NBA Draft, the Houston Rockets select.
In just a moment, the Houston Rockets are going to draft Jalen Green second overall. They hope he can be their next superstar and lead them to a championship. But how did we get here? The Rockets just 3 years prior were the best team in the league. This past year, they were the worst. To understand the present, we must first learn about the past. So let's take a trip back in time.
Jalen Green.
Get free. Down to three, down to two. It's a three. Good! Good! He got it! James Harden up.
Last touch by the Warriors.
They're going to have to take Chris Paul off of the court. Well, they might have to drag him because you know he's not going to come off the court. But he is...
The year is 2012, and the Houston Rockets find themselves wrapping up a relatively disappointing year. With a record of 34-32 and a lockout-shortened season, the Rockets are on the outside looking in for the playoffs. They dropped 7 of their last 9 games to finish the season, and subsequently missed out in the 8th seed by 2 games behind the Utah Jazz. With solid veterans such as Kyle Lowry, Luis Scola, and Kevin Martin, not making this postseason isn't the outcome that the front office was looking for. So that offseason, General Manager Daryl Morey decided that some change was needed. He shipped Kyle Lowry off to Toronto. Luis Scola found himself on the waiver wire, and he traded Kevin Martin away to Oklahoma City. The Rockets were looking for a new direction, with a focus on youth, and Morey felt that he had found the perfect player to lead his team. Coming off a 6th Man of the Year season and a finals appearance at the ripe old age of 22, James Harden was in for a big payday when his rookie contract expired, and everyone knew it, especially Oklahoma City's front office. Being a small market team with limited financial resources, Oklahoma City knew that they couldn't keep their young nucleus of Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and Harden together for long, as they would all be due for large contract extensions that the team simply couldn't afford to pay. So on October 27th, 2012, the Thunder traded Harden to the Houston Rockets for Kevin Martin, Jeremy Lamb, 2 first-round picks, and a second-round pick. Houston felt like they had landed the new face of their franchise to lead them, and they were right. With Harden at the helm for the 2012-2013 season, it quickly became evident that the Rockets had hit a home run with this trade. Harden largely took a backseat role in OKC, with Durant and Westbrook running the show. Harden came off the bench and didn't have the impact that he felt he could. The year prior he had started just 2 games. In Houston, he started every one that he played in. He went from 31 to 38 minutes per game, and every other statistic rose accordingly. Harden averaged 26 points, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists, as he molded into the star that the Rockets and Morey had hoped for. Harden went on to make his first All-Star appearance, and the Rockets cracked the playoffs. They leapfrogged the Jazz to the 8th seed, this time edging them out by 2 games instead of the other way around. They did end up losing in the first round, ironically to the Thunder, but the progress could be felt. There were encouraging signs all around for the team, and while they were not where they wanted to be quite yet, it appeared that they were certainly headed in the right direction. Going into the next season, the roster continued to improve talent-wise, with the big offseason signing of Dwight Howard. Howard was coming off his lone season with the Lakers, where he averaged 17 points and 12 boards a game, and made his 7th straight All-Star appearance, as one of the best centers in the league. To have a pick-and-roll partner for James Harden to throw lobs to was an exciting prospect for Houston. Now with a superstar duo, the Rockets felt well positioned to take another leap as a team in the 2013-14 season. And they did. The Rockets finished 54-28, good for the 4th seed in the Western Conference. Harden continued his development, averaging 25, 5, and 6, while Howard continued his dominance, averaging 18 and 12. Both players were rewarded with another All-Star appearance. Going into the playoffs, the Rockets had a lot to feel good about, as they were the higher seed for the first time since acquiring Harden. They faced the Portland Trail Blazers in the first round, who had a formidable squad as well, led by LaMarcus Aldridge. The Rockets dropped the first 2 games at home, and went on to lose the series in 6. A disappointing finish for the team, who had proved that they can consistently make the playoffs, but were unable to take the next step. The regular season success was good, but at the end of the day, this team wasn't assembled to continually lose in the first round. With the offseason signing of Trevor Ariza, the emergence of 3rd-year guard Patrick Beverley, and another year of development for Harden, the Rockets were ready to take the next step. They went on to win 56 games this season, and finished as the 2nd seed in the West, behind only the Golden State Warriors. This relatively quick ascension to the top of the standings cemented Houston as one of the best teams in the league. However, they were still missing one key element on the road to success: playoff wins. This is the year where they finally had that breakthrough though. The Rockets defeated the Dallas Mavericks in 5 games, and they grinded out another series win against the Clippers in 7. Now reaching the Western Conference Finals, this was uncharted territory. And to make matters worse, they had to face the 67-15 Golden State Warriors team, led by MVP Steph Curry. Predictably, the Warriors made quick work of the Rockets, beating them in 6 games. Still not to the mountaintop yet, but inching ever closer by the year. It seemed like the Rockets were on track to raise a banner very shortly. However, the 2015-16 season was a disaster for the Rockets. The trajectory of a championship that they seemed to be on appeared to be a thing of the past. After a 4-7 start to the season, coach Kevin McHale was fired. Dwight Howard wasn't quite as dominant as he once was. Role players like Corey Brewer, Terrence Jones, and Josh Smith all saw declines in their production. The team just couldn't put it together and finished the season an embarrassing 41-41 to grab the 8th seed in the West, before promptly being dismantled by the 73-9 Warriors. Reset time. Dwight Howard was out. Eric Gordon, Ryan Anderson, and Lou Williams were in. Clint Capella was emerging as a formidable big man down low. Mike D'Antoni was brought in to lead the team. James Harden was becoming a perennial MVP candidate. With some fresh faces and new energy, the Rockets were ready to right the ship. Behind one of the league's best offenses, Houston got back on track, with a record of 55-27, good for 3rd in the Western Conference. After cruising by the Thunder in 5 games, the Rockets ran into the 2nd-seeded San Antonio Spurs. Once again, Houston's championship quest fell short, with a loss in the 2nd round. Now with 5 years of having one of the best players in the league on their team, the Rockets had only reached the Western Conference Finals once, and haven't come close to making the finals. As they are seemingly wasting away the prime of their superstar, the urgency was building, and knowing Daryl Morey, he went big and bold. Enter Chris Paul. The Rockets were able to land the star point guard from the Clippers in a trade. There was a lot of questions going into this season with how Harden and Paul would get along. Both were ball-dominant players that were used to running the show. Would they be able to coexist together? Morey's philosophy as a GM has always been to acquire the best talent and worry about the fit later, and this was no different. Now with a roster that included Harden, Paul, Gordon, Anderson, and Capella, the Rockets figured to be a contender in the West. And the results on the court showed through. The Rockets had the best record in the league, going 65-17, beating out their nemesis Golden State by 7 games for the number 1 seed. Harden continued his rise with an MVP to add to his trophy case. In the playoffs, the Rockets breezed through the Timberwolves and Jazz, both in 5 games. This was a big moment for Houston. After years of trying, they made it back to the Western Conference Finals. But making it there was never the goal. Championships were. Would they crumble once again, or would they continue on their pursuit of raising a banner? Despite 41 points from Harden in Game 1, the Rockets let one slip away on their home court. With a convincing 22-point win in Game 2, they evened the series up as it headed back to the Bay Area. After a 41-point embarrassment of a loss, the Rockets looked ahead to a pivotal Game 4 on the road. Behind 30 points from Harden, 27 from Paul, and 16 rebounds from PJ Tucker, the Rockets squeaked out a 3-point victory to tie it up once more. Back home for Game 5, Houston was aided by a 24-point performance off the bench from Eric Gordon to hold a 1-point lead with 1 minute remaining. 1-point lead, ball in your star point guard's hands, home crowd on their feet. It was seemingly the perfect scenario. Paul dribbles through his legs, drives right, stops on a dime, back through his legs again, drives to the left this time, spins back to his right, and plants on his left leg. A motion that he's done thousands of times before in his career. He rises up, shoots a one-legged floater, and then goes down. And stays down. Paul had to leave the game and would not return. His teammates still had to play a game though, and with a few key stops, they were able to grind out a 4-point victory to take a 3-2 lead. Losing Paul was a massive loss, but the Rockets couldn't forget the great position that they were currently in. They were now just 1 win away from their first elusive finals trip, and the opponent that they had on the ropes wasn't just anyone. It was the Golden State Warriors. A Warriors team 2 seasons removed from the greatest regular season ever. A Warriors team that had 2-time MVP Steph Curry. A Warriors team that had one of the best players ever in Kevin Durant on it. A team that has continually been bouncing them from the playoffs year in and year out. More than a trip to the finals was on the line. It was the opportunity to send their biggest rival of the 2010s home. In Game 6, the Rockets got off to a dream start, going up 39-22 after the first quarter. However, in the second quarter, they lost by 7, but still maintained a 10-point lead going into the half. And then they lost the third quarter by 17, and then lost the fourth quarter by 22, to get blown out by 29 points, as the Warriors evened the series at 3 games apiece. Looking lost at times without Paul, the Rockets needed to regroup, as they could still salvage the series and make the finals. However, that was not meant to be, as they lost Game 7 on their home floor, 101-92. And they did it in fashion as well, missing a playoff record 27 straight threes. And to lose to the Warriors just made it that much more painful. If Paul never went down with an injury, there's a solid chance that the Rockets would have won that series, but bad luck had come at the worst time for them. The 2018-19 season was more of the same. Houston gained a few role players in the offseason, won a lot of regular season games, finished with a pretty high seed, won in the first round, and then you guessed it, lost to the Warriors. Things clearly weren't working as intended, and the team seemed stagnant. The Rockets needed a change once again. Enter Daryl Morey. His deal to acquire Chris Paul was a crazy one. His deal to get rid of him was even crazier. Morey called up his old friends to the north, the Oklahoma City Thunder, and worked out a deal to swap point guards. Chris Paul was headed to the Thunder, and Russell Westbrook was headed down to Houston. One potentially overlooked part of what was going on in Houston was the insane control that they gave James Harden on everything from team travel to personnel moves and coaching changes. Tim McMahon of ESPN wrote in January 2021, "The Houston Rockets culture in the James Harden era, which bridges 2 owners and now 4 head coaches, might be best summed up by a former staffer's 3 words: whatever James wants." Unless they were on the front end of a back-to-back set, it was essentially a sure thing that the Rockets stayed overnight, or even an extra day, after games in Los Angeles, Phoenix, and other road cities that rank among Harden's favorite stops. He goes on to write how Harden had forced out former head coach Kevin McHale, Dwight Howard, and now Chris Paul. The acquisition of Westbrook raised major questions as to how he and Harden would function together. Many thought Paul and Harden would have issues, and Westbrook is even more dominant than CP3 was. But sticking with Morey's philosophy of getting the best players and figuring out the rest later, the deal went through. With 2 brash and occasionally divisive guards in the backcourt, the Rockets entered the 2019-20 season hoping for more. After a suspended season, the Rockets made it into the bubble playoffs as the number 4 seed. They nearly lost in the first round to the vastly overachieving Thunder and their old point guard, Chris Paul, but they snuck by them in 7 games. This year, the kings of the West that they would run into weren't the Warriors, but rather the Lakers, and it wasn't particularly close, as Los Angeles won in 5 games en route to the championship. At this point, Houston was a train wreck. Harden and Westbrook no longer wanted to play with each other. Westbrook reportedly took issue with the lack of discipline displayed by the organization. Harden wanted out as well. Coach Mike D'Antoni told the front office that he would not be returning for the next year. General manager Daryl Morey, the one who initially got Harden to Houston, stepped down in October. The turnover didn't stop there though. A week before training camp, Westbrook was shipped off to Washington in exchange for often injured point guard John Wall. The Rockets hoped that getting Wall would calm some of Harden's disdain towards the organization. That didn't quite happen though. Throughout the beginning of the season, Harden let it be known that he wanted out. He showed up a week late to training camp, defied league health protocols, and outwardly showed his unhappiness. On January 12th, after a 17-point loss to the Lakers, Harden spoke with the media and said this:
"I love this city. I literally, have done everything that I can. This situation is crazy. It's something that I don't think can be fixed. So, thanks."
The next day, James Harden was no longer a Houston Rocket. He was shipped off to Brooklyn in a 4-team trade that saw the Rockets get back Victor Oladipo, some role players, 3 first-round picks, 1 other pick, and 4 pick swaps. That was certainly a solid haul for the Rockets, but now they lacked the leader of their team and the player that had built them from a bottom feeder to a perennial playoff team. They also lacked both talent and identity, and that was known going into the season. The one thing the Rockets did have, though, was draft picks. With James Harden gone, the 2020-21 season played out pretty much how was expected. John Wall played solid, but suffered yet another injury. The talent drop-off was obvious. When it was all said and done, Houston finished with the worst record in the league at 17-55, almost the exact opposite of their 65-17 record from just 3 years prior. The one good thing about having such a poor record is that they were guaranteed to have a high pick and a year with a loaded draft. And on July 29, 2021, the rebuild of the Houston Rockets began. Selecting second overall, Houston took Jalen Green out of the G League. Green projects to be a superstar in the NBA, with great 3-level scoring and elite athleticism. There is no limit to the player that he can be, and he figures to be Houston's leader in the coming years. They didn't stop there though. They traded with their old friends in Oklahoma City once more, this time acquiring the 16th pick in the draft, which they used to take Turkish big man Alperen Şengün. Şengün might be one of the biggest sleepers in the draft this year, and possesses a very unique skill set. The MVP of the Turkish Pro League at just 18 years old, he has good post moves, the ability to shoot the three, and great defensive ability. With 2 more first-round draft picks, the Rockets picked up Josh Christopher, a big dynamic guard who possesses elite scoring ability, and Usman Garuba, an elite defender that played last year in Spain. With such an impressive draft night haul, Houston looks primed for the future with an elite young core. When you add Kevin Porter Jr. and Christian Wood to the mix, Houston could project to be a formidable team again in the West in just a few years. A story of risky gambles, unfortunate injuries, and severed relationships, MVP seasons, team dysfunction, and postseason collapses, disgruntled stars, roster overhauls, and finally a bright future. This was the story of the rise and fall, and rise again, of the Houston Rockets.